Good afternoon and most welcome to Heidegger 1416. Inspired by the previous lecture series of A World of Perception by Merleau-Ponty, I would take up an article I met upon some 3 or 4 years ago before the event of these lectures, and it really changed my understanding of quantum mechanics and quantum physics. The articles is to be downloaded or read on the net. It's called Quantum Mechanics and Personal Identity by Eliezer Yudkowsky. And I think you can still find it on the net. Can you, Kalle?
I will check that out.
In that case, I will try to bring a link. It's from the webpage Less Wrong, in one word, Less Wrong. I begin to read it, and do be warned, it's rather complex. It's one of the tougher things to understand. But this, on the other hand, it's an unquestioned truth today in quantum mechanics. It is not the viewpoint of Eliezer Yudkowsky. It is what we understand about personal identity. Suppose that someone built an exact duplicate of you on Mars, quark by quark. To the maximum level of resolution that quantum physics permits. Which is considerably higher resolution than ordinary thermal uncertainty. Will the duplicate really be you, or just a copy? May seem unlikely a priori that physics or any experimental science could have something to say about this issue. But it is amazing the things that science can tell you. In this case, it turns out, science can rule out a notion of personal identity that depends on your being composed of the same atoms. Because modern physics has taken the concept of same atom and thrown it out of the window. There are no tiny billiard balls with individual identities. It is experimentally ruled out. And I can't wait to the summary to make a comment here because it's so important. I would say that every man and woman on this planet in some way believe deep down in the subatomic level there are differences and samenesses, and that two atoms actually could be same. They cannot. So not even on this most pertinent and realistic level. The very core of reductionism does not have what everybody thinks. And it's unquestionably ruled out in quantum mechanics. So you can see here the importance no one can be told this, alas, because it involves replacing the concept of little billiard balls with a different kind of math. If you read through the introduction that follows to basic quantum mechanics, you will be able to see that the naive concept of personal identity, the notion that you are made up of tiny pieces with individual identities that persist through time, and that your identity follows the same tiny pieces, is physical nonsense. The universe just do not work in such a way which would let that idea be meaningful. There are more abstract and philosophical arguments that you could use to rule out atom-following theories of personal identity. But our case, it so happens that we live in a universe where the issue is flatly settled by standard physics. It's like proposing that personal identity follows phlogiston.
Phlogiston.
You could argue against it on philosophical grounds, but we happen to live in a universe where phlogiston itself is just a mistaken theory to be discarded, which settles the issue much more abruptly. And no, this does not rely on a woo-woo Mysterian interpretation of quantum mechanics. This post was meant to demystify quantum mechanics and reveal it as non-mysterious. It just happens to be a fact that once you get to the non-mysterious version of quantum mechanics, you find that the reason why physics once looked mysterious has to do with reality being made up of different stuff than little billiard balls. Complex amplitudes in configuration spaces, to be exact. Though here I jump ahead on myself. So it's a univocal understanding in quantum mechanics that identity does not exist. And I would say in all branches of knowledge it is somehow assumed, especially in the humanities. And it's even worse that it doesn't make any sense. It was nonsense from the very beginning. It's one of those expressions that have no use. Got its use from a misinterpretation of reality in the Newtonian paradigm. And it has thereafter spread. And since it's not coming from a sound language game, it is creating havoc in thinking. It's like a bacteria spreading some horrible disease. If you read all the way to the end, you will, I hope, gain an entirely new perspective on where your identity is located once the little billiard balls are ruled out. This is more audacious, and I am well aware of how unlikely that sounds. But you will see, if you read to the end, it is fully supported. Reductionism. We build models of the universe that have many different levels of description. But so far as anyone has been able to determine, the universe itself has only the single level of fundamental physics. Reality doesn't explicitly compute protons, only quarks. Zombies. Don't try to put your consciousness outside physics. Whatever makes you say, I think, therefore I am, causes your lips to move. It is within the chains of cause and effect that produce our observed universe. The generalized anti-zombie principle. We can try to generalize the anti-zombie principle to show that anything which exerts only an infinite small influence on your brain should not be able to make your consciousness go out like a light. Quantum explanations. Quantum mechanics does not deserve its fearsome reputation. If you tell people something is supposed to be mysterious, they will not understand it. It's human intuitions that are strange or weird. Physics itself is perfectly normal. I would say that's the point in itself. talking about historical erroneous concept like particles or waves is just asking to confuse people, present the real unified quantum physics straight out. The series will take a strictly realist perspective. Quantum equations describe something that is real and out there. I will go to the zest of it. I will try to make a summary this early. I need to have a pause there. I will make a preemptive summary here because it's so difficult to reach understanding. In layman's terms, shall we try to explain more carefully in the next lecture? What we discovered in physics is that you cannot tell one atom from another. We know this as a fact. And if you can't tell them apart, we cannot tell them to be the same either. And this is shown by mathematics, that there is absolutely no way of discerning atoms. And this mistaken idea of identity, I said earlier, it is Newtonian. It is part of the Newtonian paradigm, but it has older, much older origins than that. Goes all the way to beings, the start and the evolution of beings in contrast to being. In being, the wholeness or the holoflux, difference and sameness do make sense. It's since they are relational properties, so to speak. But starting with the Ionian philosophers of nature, the physikos, we instead go to beings, separable, identical. Hello again. I might have lost my train of thought, but I'll see if I can recapture it. We were taken out of the place where we were recording. And I was talking about the Ionian philosophers of nature, the physikos. And in their search for beings, often called the essence or the arche or the cause of everything, and these are naturally very close to the atoms mentioned here by Eliezer Yudkowsky. They needed or simultaneously came into existence what I would call the Newtonian way of looking at identity and non-identity. It is vaguely similar to what I earlier mentioned in the context of Newton. For him to stop things from happening at the same time, he needed a timeline and therefore invented Newtonian linearity. Included in the, I would say, understanding of archaea, I will use that word now, archaea. You can substitute it for essence or atom. You need simultaneously, or it will simultaneously be created, the Newtonian identity and difference. It's a sort of language game. You cannot have archaea if you don't have sameness or identity, which is even a bit stronger than sameness. It has this transcendental idea of being exactly impossible to expose as being in any way different. If the archaea is going to be an essence, it has to be the same. it is inherent. The atoms of Democritus wouldn't make any sense if they were randomly different. It would undermine the understanding of the atoms. And difference in this stronger Newtonian sense is also very important. This is how you tell when they are not the same. It goes for falsification of an hypothesis about the RK/essence. This slowly, because I don't think, and that's my personal opinion, it did not evolve in an instant, but it slowly came into shape, more and more distinct. And in this very phase, Heraclitus saw an opportunity to present his own philosophy. I think his philosophy even got strengthened. He could more clearly tell that specific identity and specific difference rather were traits that were unison. This is similar how we get physical laws from assuming, so to speak, initial conditions. They are codependent and spring into existence simultaneously. And they reinforce each other's. It's a physical tautology. The idea of identity in the Newtonian sense is the same. It is codependent with absolute difference. Once this sort of tendency stabilized and in the end became something that you couldn't question after Heraclitus. And the reason for that is exposed by Heidegger and his heritage. Because it's foundational and not axiomatic, that is, not assumed. Let me give you an example. No one had to tell me about the Newtonian identity or difference when I grew up. It was everywhere, was well established, never talked about, but it was underneath the surface. So when I stumbled upon this rather cumbersome article, I would say it's a hard read. It doesn't go directly to the point. I was completely shocked. I realized if I had not read this article, I could have missed out in quantum mechanics that identity does not reside there, that it doesn't even make any sense to speak of it. And just as Eliezer Yudkowsky said, it's a proven fact. We know from experiment you cannot tell one atom from another. Something that makes them neither same, that is identical, but neither different. So you see here how identity and absolute difference go hand in hand. And this is closely connected to archae or atoms. This not normal way of using same, like in absolutely same. That is an invention or a mistake by the Ionian philosophers of nature. And I would say rather it's a development in thought that uncovered some thinking, some realizations that later became very important for technological development in the West. But at the same time it covered up in a way that did not get uncovered until the event of quantum mechanics. And here the beings, or let me just call them entities with the plural, is very important, because one and many is another of those combining forces. If you don't have identity and difference, then you cannot have many in that specific way, in that odd use of the term many. Paul Feyerabend, the Austrian philosopher of science, not nature, but you could call him a philosopher of nature. He noted that during the pre-Socratic time, or slightly before, there is a clear odd use of certain words like estein and ousia, I won't go into those now, but it sounded very odd to even their contemporaries, or rather, to be more precise, a bit off. Like the concepts or the use of the words, which is better, how you actually handled the words, sometimes were slightly or very off how you were supposed to use a word like a stain. Once this stabilized, almost like a piece of clay getting dry and hardened, and because it was under the surface, it was never hypothesized and thereby not questionable. It sneaked into the Newtonian project of Principia. The pieces of rice that are used to, so to speak, construct Newtonian homogeneous space are identical. They are placed with an equal distance in empty space to give space the feature distance. If they were not identical in this odd way, they could not later be taken away. And oddly enough, all that remains is the distances without anything in the space. And by doing so, he had constructed an equidistant, homogeneous canvas for projecting his atoms or things, planets, to make his calculations. First one in history to question sameness was Leibniz, or identity. His essence or atoms are very unlike the ones of the Ionian philosophers of nature. They don't have windows, as he writes. So you can look into them and find the essence in the inside that would tell you that this is this specific atom and not another one. And that this very atom is identical to itself. This is what Yudkowsky is showing when he demonstrates that you cannot go into the decimals that can tell you the exact weight of that particular atom, so as to render it either identical or different. It simply is not a feature of reality. Can compare the decimals to the inside of the monad/atom. There is no inside if you open the window. And the inside could be a long, long line of decimals showing, oh, this is the one. It is not that one, but it is this one. Things that I grew up assuming without anyone telling me, without anyone teaching me. Yudkowsky was the first one for me to verbalize it, although in his rather cumbersome way, but it became absolutely clear. Before we go into the more equation-like things in the next lecture, or the coming lecture where I will go into this deeper, another one who looked very close into identity is the French philosopher Jacques Derrida. He puts it in other terms. How can you be the same as yourself, or how could something be the same as itself? It will differ and differ. It will be in a different slot in space or in time, and therefore be different to itself. In physics, this absolute identity is a thing of the past. For obvious reasons, it doesn't work. But somehow, almost like a bug, I would say, like a computer bug, it remains in our thinking. And if you go deep into it, you will understand it doesn't really make sense. How can difference be absolute without comparison? And how could space be homogeneous when Newton used this illicit, so to speak, use of identity to construct it? And maybe the most interesting thing is, when he constructed his homogeneous space, he also made another thinking error of sorts, created another paradox. that was location, that was later questioned. In the Newtonian way, that location was questioned by Heisenberg. And originally, Newtonian space and time are the, so to speak, mirror sides of identity and difference. In that most specific and very, very original use. And in many areas today, I think most areas that are plagued is history. When we talk about a true event in history, like separable from the rest of history. The Battle of Narva or Poltava, out of context and being in itself self-identical. Or why not some artifact, a dagger? Did that really belong to Charles the Great? Is it the same dagger as he held in his same hand? To conclude, it's also a question that will be a theme for another lecture of this odd use of plurality among the Ionian philosophers of nature. A use of plurality that excludes singularity. And that is definitely beings. The plural is important. Could we have a comment here, maybe from a biblical view or some other view? You can take the same chair, it's very comfortable.
Okay, I come back. Thank you. Thank you for this paper about quantum mechanism and personal identity by this gold scholar Eliezer Yudkowsky. It was interesting. Also in Carl Rovelli's relation quantum physics, it's not possible to think that if my atoms would be placed on Mars, that I would be the same. Why not? Yes, because everything is about relations. I exist only in relation to something else. So Mars I would perhaps be alone or with other people that I don't know from Earth. So it's impossible also on Carl Rovelli's relation of quantum physics. And yes, in Newton's space or Newton's world, everything is the same. It has to be for that to work, to calculate everything. There is no hidden corners. Hidden corners. Everything is smooth. Everything is same. So Derrida is a solution, for instance, to help to so everything his keyword is difference. So everything is different. Everything is difference, and I would say sameness is an impossibility. So you have to say so. Sameness, I would say, is linked to Newton's world. Sameness is as impossible as Newton's world in reality. While the real world to identity is difference, I would say, is or similarity. Similarity works. Similarities works because I'm similar, let's say, to Hans or not a human being, because we have something common. Similarity works, but not sameness. There is no sameness. Or would you agree, Hans? I thank you for this paper by Yudkowsky. Excuse me.
What happened to it?
What happened to it?
Oh, there it is.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly, yeah. That's what's this about. this identity is almost like the Wittgensteinian hypnotization by an image. And once you get into it, I needed this paper. It happened 3 or 4 years ago. I even remember the occasion when I realized I was sitting in a bathtub and I had my little Archimedean eureka movement there. Yeah, sameness you can have likeness. All those things are more stemming from being, and as you say, Rovelli is talking about being. How could you be teleported? You are your environment to some certain degree. And to add to that, what is you? Your identity. Your sameness is coming from there too. He doesn't mean with relational quantum mechanics that all my identity is gone in that way, but it's stemming from the outside, not from the inside. The monads or atoms, they don't have windows. And that's an excellent remark by Carl Leibniz. It's just into the very zest of it. His first name is not Carl. What is his first name?
Leibniz. What was his first name?
Yes, I was interrupted before in my train of thought, so.
We would need a new candidate where Leibniz is the hero.
Yeah.
Gottfried
Leibniz, yeah. Almost the same name as Gottlob Frege. Gottfried Leibniz. Yeah, it was a very vivid, picturesque thing, and it doesn't make sense, the concept actually. It will not after the readout of this. And a lot of other things are starting to make sense, which is great.
And we could joke about the names, so make a pun on Gottfried Leibniz, since his name means peace with God, Gottfried. And so Gottfried, so Leibniz understood that sameness is not possible. So, and that is, you have peace with God. When you understand sameness is not possible.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. And goodbye.
Thank you very much for your patience, and sorry about that mishap. I hope next time I will not lose my train of thoughts, but I kept it up to some extent. Bye bye for now.
Thank you.